The letter was on the kitchen table, the Harbor View Estates Homeowners Association logo gleaming in the header like a bad omen. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. 2 pages of letterhead paper fell onto the old wood my great-great-great-grandfather had carved 150 years ago. Embargo, violations, $37,500 in fines. The house where I was born, where my husband Howard passed away, where I raised my daughter Jessica, now threatened by cold words on official paper. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get more stories like this. A property in violation of the statutes, aesthetic deterioration, non-conforming historic structures. I read aloud, each word sounding more absurd than the last. The $37,500 in accumulated fines represented almost my entire retirement fund as a teacher. I immediately called Jessica. "Mom, this is completely illegal," she said after reviewing the documents. "These fines just appeared out of nowhere. As a retired history teacher, you've kept this house in pristine condition. Besides, the house is more than a century older than the HOA. Jessica, with her experience as a paralegal, checked the association's records while I made tea in the kitchen, where generations of the Johnson family had gathered. "Diane Anderson," Jessica murmured, furiously typing on her laptop. "She's been the HOA president for 5 years. Wife of Robert Anderson from Anderson Luxury Properties." The name Diane brought back an uncomfortable memory. 2 years earlier, shortly after Howard's death, she had shown up at my door with a folder of documents and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "A generous offer for your unique property," she had said at the time, pointing to the Victorian house that stood out among the modern buildings around it. When I refused, her smile completely vanished. "You're going to regret not taking this opportunity, Martha." 2 days after that letter, Olivia, my neighbor for decades, knocked on my door. Her 63-year-old eyes were full of worry. "Martha, you're not the only one. The Ramirez family lost their house last month. The HOA slapped so many fines on them that they couldn't pay. Guess who bought the property at auction for 1/3 of the value? Anderson Luxury Properties." A pattern began to emerge. While researching at the city archives, I discovered that 6 historic houses in Harbor View had been sold at forced auctions over the last 2 years, all bought by the Anderson Company, all replaced by luxury condos overlooking the ocean. In the attic, among Howard's old boxes, I found something that froze my blood. My late husband, meticulous as the lawyer he was, had kept recordings and detailed notes of every interaction with the HOA. The last entry was dated a week before his heart attack. "The Anderson threatened to use the association's statutes to take our property if we did not sell. Apparently, our ocean view is too valuable for people like us." I brought the evidence to Jessica, who turned pale. "Mom, this isn't just unethical, it's criminal. We need more proof." Carlos, my retired neighbor and former lawyer, helped us document the irregularities. Together, we discovered that part of the public boardwalk along the shore, which the city charged the HOA for, was actually built on my property, a decades-old boundary error that invalidated many of the supposed violations. On a rainy morning, as I sorted through documents on the porch, an official car stopped in front of the house. Mayor Roberts, an imposing figure in a dark suit, stepped up the century-old steps. "Mrs. Johnson, I came in person because this is serious." He handed me an envelope. "A recording arrived at my office. I think you need to hear it." Diane Anderson's voice filled the room. "Roberts, once old Johnson is out, we'll have complete control of the shore. The fines are already in place. In 3 months, she'll be evicted and we can begin demolition. No one will care about an old relic when they see the profits from the new property taxes." The mayor looked at me with determination. "Martha, there's more. Your house is being considered for the National Maritime Historic Register. Captain Johnson's legacy is vital to our local history." Diane knew that and was racing against time. An emergency HOA meeting was called for a Friday. Diane smiled confidently as she presented the motion to foreclose on my property. The community auditorium was packed, many faces showing worry, while others, like Greg Wilson, Diane's right-hand man, wore calculated smiles. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up with trembling legs but a steady voice. "Before you vote," I began, my voice echoing throughout the silent auditorium, "I'd like to share some information that affects not just my house, but our entire Harborview community." Diane interrupted immediately, her red blazer contrasting with the blue upholstered chair in the president's seat. "Martha, we're here only to vote on your property. There's no time for sentimental rambling." "It's not rambling," I replied, pulling a folder from the bag Jessica had given me. "It's evidence of a systematic pattern of real estate fraud." A murmur ran through the room. Greg Wilson leaned in to whisper something to Diane, whose confident smile started to waver. "Ladies and gentlemen of the association," I continued, "in the last 2 years, 12 historic properties in our neighborhood have been forced into auctions through fabricated fines. All was snapped up by Anderson Luxury Properties for a fraction of their real value." I projected on the screen a detailed chart that Jessica had prepared, showing each property, the fines imposed, and the final purchase price. Gasps of surprise filled the auditorium. As you can see, every house was targeted immediately after its owners refused the initial purchase offers. In each case, the fines started immediately after the refusal. Diane banged the gavel repeatedly. "This is slander. Martha is trying to distract us from her own violations." "Violations?" I asked, pulling up another document. "Like this notice about my unauthorized gazebo, which is really the original lookout built in 1873, properly recorded in the city archives, or this fine for irregular fence, which is actually the historic boundary of the property, confirmed by this official county map." Mayor Roberts stood up from the back of the room, slowly walking down the center aisle. The murmuring increased as people recognized his presence. "Or maybe," I continued, "we should talk about how part of the public boardwalk on the boulevard was illegally constructed on my property, a fact that Mrs. Anderson knew about, but deliberately kept hidden to manufacture violations." At that moment, the side doors opened and 2 plainclothes detectives quietly entered, positioning themselves at the corners of the room. Diane visibly paled, her eyes frantically searching for the nearest exit. "Martha, I don't know what story you're trying to make up, but it's not made up," I interrupted, pressing play on the recorder the mayor had given me. Diane's voice filled the now completely silent auditorium. "Once old Johnson is out, we'll have complete control of the shore. The fines are in place. In 3 months, she'll be evicted, and we can begin demolition." Diane abruptly got to her feet, knocking over her chair. "That recording is illegal. It can't be used." Mayor Roberts finally spoke, his calm but authoritative voice cutting through the tension. "Actually, Mrs. Anderson, this recording was obtained legally during an investigation into municipal corruption. You knew you were being recorded when you said those words in my office." The detectives began approaching the boardroom table. Greg Wilson was sweating profusely, undoing his tie as if it were choking him. "Moreover," I continued, "I have here the records kept by my late husband, documenting every threat you made when we refused to sell our property, including your visit a week before his death, when you explicitly said you would use your power at the HOA to force us out." Olivia stood up, her fragile 63-year-old frame radiating indignation. "Diane did the same to us. She said our house was too outdated for the future of the neighborhood. We started getting fines the very next day. Like a dam breaking, other neighbors began sharing similar experiences. Carlos, the retired lawyer, confirmed that he had documented identical patterns in at least 8 cases. Diane tried to make her way to the side exit, but one of the detectives blocked her path. "Mrs. Anderson, you need to stay for some questioning. This is absurd. All I did was what I thought was best for the neighborhood. These old houses were devaluing our properties." Mayor Roberts moved toward the stage. "Mrs. Anderson, in addition to the evidence presented by Mrs. Johnson, we discovered suspicious transfers between your account and those of 2 zoning department officials. Officials who, coincidentally, approved all the fines against these historic properties." The second detective stepped up behind Diane. "Diane Anderson, you are under arrest on suspicion of real estate fraud, falsifying municipal documents, bribing public officials, and conspiracy. We watched in shock as Diane was escorted out, her face twisted not in confidence anymore, but in anger and disbelief. Greg Wilson tried to slip away quietly, but another officer who had just arrived stopped him at the front door. The meeting was immediately adjourned. Neighbors who barely spoke to each other for years were now animatedly discussing experiences of intimidation and harassment under Diane's regime. Jessica hugged me, tears in her eyes, whispering, "Dad would have been so proud." The legal process that followed revealed an even more extensive scheme than we had imagined. In the weeks after Diane's arrest, federal police investigators discovered evidence of money laundering through the acquired properties. The district attorney's office was working day and night to build a solid case. 6 months went by. I was working in the garden when Jessica arrived with a folder of documents, her face glowing. "Mom, it's over! Diane accepted the settlement!" We sat on the porch my great-great-great-grandfather built, reading the terms of the settlement as the sun set over the ocean. The same view that had drawn my ancestors to this coast. 5 years of probation, Jessica read. Financial restitution to all 12 affected families. A lifetime ban from participating in any homeowners association or real estate activity. And she paused dramatically. The return of all the original property documents that she removed from the city archives. The investigation revealed that Diane and Robert Anderson not only created fake fines, but also tampered with property records to facilitate their fraudulent acquisitions. They had bribed 3 municipal employees to ignore discrepancies and approve demolitions without proper historical due diligence. "And that's not all," Jessica continued, pulling another document from the folder. "The house's status as a historic landmark has been approved. Captain Johnson's house is officially on the National Maritime Historic Register." Silent tears streamed down my face as I took in the news. The house wasn't just mine now. It belonged to American history. It was protected against future real estate schemes and greed. The doorbell rang. To my surprise, it was Gregory Wilson, Diane's former right-hand man, carrying an old wooden box. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, visibly uncomfortable, "I came to return something before leaving town." Inside the box, we found my great-great-great-grandfather's original maritime maps. Century-old documents detailing the region's first commercial port, and the original deed to the property on parchment yellowed by time. "Diane asked me to remove these from the county records," Greg confessed, avoiding my gaze. "She said that if the historical records disappeared, it would be easier to classify the house as having no cultural value." "Why are you returning these now?" I asked, holding reverently a hand-drawn map by my great-great-great-grandfather. Greg hesitated. "Because she blackmailed me into participating. I have a special needs son, and she threatened to have my insurance coverage canceled if I didn't cooperate. I never wanted to hurt anyone, especially not a house with so much history." Jessica examined the documents, amazed. "These maps show the original development of the whole port. They're priceless." Greg explained that he was moving to Arizona to start over. Before leaving, he handed me one last envelope. A copy of Diane's full confession. She implicated Robert and 3 other local real estate developers. Their scheme affected coastal communities in 3 counties. As he walked away, I realized that even in the darkest situations, some people find their way back to doing what's right. The investigation had revealed that Diane was just the visible tip of a bigger operation that had targeted historic properties along the coast, turning them into luxury condos with inflated prices, often built with substandard materials and questionable approvals. The local news covered the case extensively. "In an unprecedented real estate scheme," announced the reporter in front of the courthouse, former HOA President Diane Anderson and 6 others face multiple federal charges. Authorities estimate that over 30 historic properties were affected, many irreversibly lost to demolition. The community slowly began to heal. A new HOA board was elected, this time with strict transparency rules and limited terms. Carlos, my lawyer neighbor, helped draft new bylaws that prioritized historical preservation and drastically limited the powers to impose fines. To my surprise, Mayor Roberts invited me to join the newly created City Historical Preservation Board. We need people like you, Martha, who understand that our maritime roots are worth more than any real estate venture. One spring morning, while tidying up the room with the historical documents that Greg had returned, I heard knocks at the door. It was him again, thinner and with deep dark circles, but his eyes carried determination. "Mrs. Johnson, I couldn't leave," Greg said, holding another varnished wooden box. "There are more documents that Diane hid. I thought I should deliver them personally before testifying tomorrow." I invited him in, noticing his hesitation as he crossed the threshold of the house that almost got destroyed. Jessica, who had spent the night with me reviewing documents for the preservation board, appeared in the kitchen doorway with 2 cups of coffee, freezing when she recognized the visitor. "I know I don't deserve your hospitality," Greg admitted, placing the box on the century-old table. "But I want you to understand that I was manipulated. Diane had information that could have hurt my son, Tyler. He has cerebral palsy, and his treatment depends on the special health plan that Robert Anderson arranged." I opened the box as Jessica cautiously approached. Inside, we found the original port blueprints drawn by my great-great-great-grandfather, letters between him and local authorities establishing the first lighthouse system on the coast, and even more surprising, a diary detailing the rescue of 17 runaway slaves he helped transport to freedom in Canada. "Oh my God," I whispered, touching the yellowed pages with reverence. "This changes everything we knew about our family's role in local history." Greg nodded, his restless hands betraying his nervousness. "Diane knew about this. She discovered these documents in the city archives and took them. She said that an abolitionist story would only raise the historical value of the property and make demolition harder." Jessica thumbed through the diary, her trained paralegal eyes absorbing every detail. "This isn't just important to our family, Greg. It's a significant piece of abolitionist history on the coast. Why are you giving these back now?" Greg took a deep breath, finally accepting the cup of coffee Jessica silently offered him as a truce. "Because I realized I was losing my integrity piece by piece, justifying every action in the name of protecting my son. But what example am I setting for Tyler if I continue compromising everything I believe in? Tomorrow, I'm going to testify against Diane and Robert, even if that means losing the special health plan." A tear rolled down Greg's hardened face. "I can't undo the houses that have been demolished or fix all the lives I hurt, but I can try to set things right now." In that moment, my view of Greg changed. I saw not a villain, but a desperate man who had made terrible choices under extreme pressure. "The district attorney's office offered me immunity in exchange for my testimony," he continued. "But that doesn't erase what I did. After the trial, we're even planning to move. Tyler deserves a new start, far from the shadows of what happened here." Before leaving, Greg paused at the door. "Martha, there's one more thing you need to know. Howard suspected everything. The records you found. He was gathering evidence against Diane. The week before he died, he confronted me. I think the stress from that confrontation may have contributed to his heart attack." The weight of that revelation hit me like a violent wave. Howard, my meticulous and fair Howard, fighting until the end to protect our house. I couldn't reply, unable to find words as Greg walked away under the light rain that began to fall. That night, alone in the office that once belonged to Howard, I reread his notes with new eyes. His last entry, dated 3 days before his passing, read, "I confronted GW today. I believe there might still be some decency in him. Maybe someday he'll make the right choice." As always, Howard was right. Gregory's testimony was devastating for Diane's case. He detailed the scheme, from fabricating fines to manipulating historical records. Most impactful, he revealed recordings of meetings where Robert Anderson was discussing with foreign investors how they were cleaning the coast of outdated relics to build what they called the American Riviera, a resort and luxury condo complex that would completely transform our coastal community. 3 weeks after the testimony, we received the news. In addition to criminal penalties, the courts ruled that all affected families would receive full financial compensation. for those who lost their homes to demolitions, the amount included not only market value, but also damages for emotional distress. On the last day before leaving for good, Greg showed up at my door again, this time accompanied by Tyler, a bright-eyed teenager in a powered wheelchair. We wanted to say goodbye properly, Greg explained, and Tyler insisted on seeing the house that his father helped save. The young man smiled, his movements limited by cerebral palsy, but his eyes sparkled with curiosity. Is it true a captain built this house? That he rescued enslaved people? I spent the afternoon showing Tyler the maps and diaries of Captain Johnson, watching his fascination with maritime history. When I mentioned that I planned to turn part of the house into a small museum about local port history, his eyes lit up. Dad, can we come back to visit once the museum is ready? Greg looked at me uncertainly. In that moment, I realized that redemption isn't a one-time event. It's a continuous journey. You are always welcome, I replied sincerely. This house has survived 150 years of storms. It can survive our recent past too. After he left, I found an envelope Greg had discreetly left on the table. Inside was a letter to Howard, never sent, apologizing for his cowardice and promising to do right when he had the courage. Along with it, a substantial check with a simple note, for the museum, from Tyler. 2 months later, on a sunny Saturday morning, Captain Johnson's house garden was bursting with life and conversation. Families from all over the neighborhood, many who barely spoke to each other under Diane's oppressive regime, were now sharing food and stories at the first Harbor View Maritime Festival. Olivia manned a table of traditional sailor foods, while Carlos led tours of the property, explaining the historical significance of every architectural detail. Jessica had invited local historians who presented panels on the port's importance to the Underground Railroad network that helped runaway slaves. In the center of the garden, a newly installed plaque officially declared Captain Johnson's house a National Historic Landmark. Its description, highlighting not only the exceptional architecture, but also Captain Thomas Johnson's role in the economic and social development of the region. Mayor Roberts wandered among the guests, occasionally stopping to introduce the newly approved Coastal Preservation Act, legislation inspired by our case that created additional protections for historic properties throughout the region and drastically limited the powers of homeowners associations over pre-1950 structures. Martha, the mayor called, as he approached with a woman I recognized as the director of the State Historical Preservation Department. Helen would like to discuss the possibility of including your property in a new educational tour about the maritime and abolitionist history of the coast. While we talked about plans for the small museum that would be set up on the house's ground floor, I noticed Jessica watching from the other side of the garden, a nostalgic smile on her face. Next to her, the empty chair we had symbolically left for Howard, decorated with his old fishing hat and a photo of him on the porch. Later, when most of the guests had left, Jessica and I sat on the porch watching the sunset over the sea, the very view that had inspired Howard to tell Jessica bedtime stories about Captain Johnson. You know, Mom, Jessica said while holding my hand, Dad always said this house was more than just wood and nails, that it carried stories that deserved to be preserved. I nodded, remembering the nights Howard recounted Captain Johnson's tales to help Jessica fall asleep. He was right. And now, those stories are safe. I watched as families continued chatting in the garden, new friendships forming, community bonds rebuilt from the ashes of Diane's tyranny. The victory wasn't just mine, or even my family's. It was a win for the history that was almost wiped out by greed, for a community that found its collective voice, and for the principle that some things are too valuable to be measured in dollars and cents. The following week, I received a simple envelope from Arizona. Inside was a photo of Tyler smiling in front of a local maritime museum and a note from Greg. We started our own maritime history project here. Tyler says he was inspired by you. Sometimes the legacy we preserve shows up in unexpected places. I placed the photo on the mural I was creating for the museum, along with images of the house through the decades, the rescued documents, and the families who had lived here. In the center, a framed photo of Captain Thomas Johnson looking determined toward the horizon, and beneath it, the words we found in his diary, now inscribed at the museum's entrance. This house is not just a shelter from the ocean's storms, but a beacon of hope for those seeking refuge. May its walls preserve not only our stories, but also our highest principles of justice and freedom. The ground floor of the house, now transformed into a museum space, was scheduled to officially open next month. Local schools had already set up visits, and maritime historians expressed interest in the captain's diaries. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get more stories like this. As I prepared the final details for the opening, I reflected on how something that began as a threat to my house turned into an opportunity to preserve not just the physical structure, but also to strengthen an entire community. Life's storms, like those at sea that my great-great-great-grandfather once faced, often reveal the true strength of our foundations.